faces here as well tonight. For those that I haven't met, my name's Kate McKernan and I'm the Fire Recovery Manager for Strathbogie Shire. And we have our recovery team and various other officers here tonight, which Rachel will introduce for you. We are recording the session tonight, so for those that weren't able to make it, can view it online. So just be wary of that. If you have any concerns, then come and speak to me afterwards. I do apologise. We have booklets on all the tables, which sort of has some of the content that we'll go through tonight. And it has areas where you can take notes and write down. Unfortunately, the text is very small, but we only picked them up from the printers this afternoon. So we will get them reprinted and redistributed, but at least there's somewhere where you can make some notes. That's it. I'll hand you over to Rachel. So Rachel Frampton is our Director of Community and Planning. Rachel will do the introductions to the team and take you through the format of tonight's session as well.
Okay, and thank you for allowing us to come up here. It's really good to actually come up and meet with you guys here on site. I'm hoping some of you have gone into town and visited the Recovery Hub. What we know is it's so important to be able to bring services and support up here to you where it's easier to access. So thank you for coming along tonight and making the time. There will be lots of information and there may be lots of questions. We may not have all the answers tonight, but there are a number of staff here tonight and that will be available to you throughout this journey to provide some answers and guidance to some of those questions. The focus for tonight really is around starting to talk about your rebuild, if that's what you're choosing to do, and helping you to navigate some of what can be a really complex area in terms of planning, environmental health, building surveying, and these are some areas you may not have had much interaction with depending on how old your property is. I was talking to someone who said, oh well, I built in the 80s. Things now are very different in terms of a planning space, so we are here to help. I'm not sure, I highly doubt many of you watched too many council meetings, but we did have a council meeting last night, and at that council meeting, council resolved to waive 50% of all fees associated with building, planning and environmental health. We've asked the state government for a full waiver to be able to provide everyone with 100% waiver. The state government are yet to have provided us any indication whether they can provide support. But as council, we are offering you a 50% waiver, which I know does not necessarily go the full distance that you might like it to. But we are really hoping that we can walk with you guys as you rebuild and provide some level of relief for you. We're also going to continue our advocacy though to the state government for that full 100% waiver. And there's also been a change in our requirements around something called a land capability assessment, which if you've got a septic tank and you've had one in the recent, I'm going to say 5 years, 10 years, you may have been required to get one. But for some of you may not realise that. So previously an LCA, we might call them, a land capability assessment was required. We're actually removing that requirement as well because we know how expensive they can be. So for your low risk and moderate risk properties, there isn't a requirement for an LCA. For a high risk property though, we'll work with you through our environmental health team to support you to navigate that process as well. So the format tonight is that we'll actually start with planning. So we're going to sort of mirror the process that you will follow. So starting with that planning conversation, which will then follow on to, we've got Glenn, the bushfire planning coordinator from the CFA, to talk about this bushfire management overlay and what it means for you, as well as then we'll hand over to Lisa, who's our environmental health officer, and then also to Anthony Bell, who's our Municipal Building Surveyor. So please jot down notes or questions that you might have. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask those questions. If they're broad for everyone's information, that's a great time to ask them. If they're really specific to your property, you might want to have a conversation with one of the officers, or we might try and organise a time to catch up with you, because the biggest thing about this is that every property is different. every property has different requirements on it. So your journey or your requirements may be slightly different to someone else's because of the uniqueness of your property. So lots of information. Please jot down some notes, and I will hand over to Steph and Barb from our planning department.
Hello everybody, I'm Steph. So we've just got a little bit of an introduction to planning, a little planning 101 for the area. So bear with us while we go through those, and if you've got any questions, hopefully we'll get a chance to answer them later. So we understand that rebuilding after an emergency can be very overwhelming, and there's lots of information that you're going to need to and decisions to make, so it can be difficult to know where to begin. We know that the planning is a complex space, and as Rachel touched on before, it might have changed quite a lot since you've needed to do that before, or maybe you've never had to do this before and this is all new and lots of decision making for you. So we aim to walk you through the basics of the planning process in very hopefully simple terms. What you might need, what to expect, and how we can help you move forward. But the main takeaway that we'd like you to have is please come and talk to us. All of your properties will be unique, and so we'd like to give you specific advice, because what is information for you may not also apply to your neighbour and may be different even to different parts of your property. So one of the most common questions we receive is, do I need a planning permit? So in most situations the answer is yes, but it's not always straightforward, and it depends on the planning controls of your property. So these include the zoning of your land and any overlays that apply to the land, and what you're proposing to rebuild and where you want to build it. So that's why the most important step, and we'll bang on about this all night, is come and speak to us. The good news is the planning system does recognise that you need to rebuild after an emergency, and there are some provisions in the planning scheme which gives you a little bit of time on how you can do those and making rebuilding easier. So for example, if you need to rebuild on a home that existed before, there might be provisions in the scheme which allow you to do that even though it might not necessarily have been allowed in a different situation. However, these don't remove all the requirements, and it's still important to check with us what applies to your land. So most rural properties here are in what's called the farming zone. I think we've got some maps up here. But basically, I think you're probably all in the farming zone. You probably all understand that. There it is there. So if your land is in the farming zone, you may need a planning permit to rebuild, particularly if your lot is smaller than 40 hectares. And there's also what we call setbacks in the farming zone, which can also trigger a planning permit. So even if you had a house before, you may still need approval for a rebuild, but we'll help guide you through that.
What if we don't get it? What if you say no? You're going to push me off my land.
Well, that's unlikely, but there may be situations where people may not be able to rebuild, and that's why we say come to us and talk to us about it, and we can see what considerations you have for yours.
So the
Because
pre-existing
we're
use
really
rights.
concerned that
Pre-existing use rights.
that, there's been a house there since the 1800s.
Yeah.
It's certainly smaller than 40 hectares.
Yeah, so those pre-existing use rights, there's a provision in the Crown Planning Scheme called Clause 5210, which allows you to rebuild that house that existed before, and you have up to 7 years to do so. So we can go through that provision in more detail,
Right,
and
that's
that applies to you.
Thank you.
It also means that process is a little bit more simplified. So the other overlay that affects people's land is the bushfire management overlay. And in many cases, if your rebuild is within that overlay, you will need a planning permit. And part of that planning permit, you might be required to prepare bushfire management documents. And we'll leave that to Glenn, who's the expert in the room, to talk about those in a bit more detail. You may also need what's called a BAL assessment as well, which measures the bushfire risk and the build for your property. These are generally prepared by a consultant and then reviewed by the CFA. Then there's the erosion management overlay, which I think a lot of the area is covered by the erosion management overlay. If this applies to your land, again, it's likely you're going to need a planning permit. And possibly, in some cases, a geotechnical report might be required depending on what type of development you're proposing and the conditions of the land. So that's all I've got for me. I'll hand over to Bob.
The pre-existing use concept, it doesn't
Doesn't cover
can,
everything. It
yeah.
does covers the use of the land. So if you are on a lot smaller than 100 acres or 40 hectares, you would normally need to apply for what is use of the land for a dwelling because it doesn't meet that minimum lot size. So the clause 5210 covers off that use requirement and allows you that rebuild without having to provide all that documentation. So you
even
may or
if it
may
isn't a
not.
BMO, it's still
Then you've got the development overlays, yeah.
yeah.
Which is, so
So
anytime you
pre-existing use
build,
doesn't count.
anytime you build anything in some of those overlays, you require a planning permit, whether it was there before or not,
Yeah, right.
because they sort of cover the actual building.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to chat a bit about the planning process and how that works. So there's a few steps that we need to look at, and the first step is coming to see us and having a chat. And we really encourage you to do this. That early discussion is really, really helpful in setting you on the right path and identifying what may be required for your particular property. From there, you move into preparing your plans and the supporting information you may need. So if it's in the EMO or the BMO, some of the documents that Steph mentioned before. Once everything is ready, you submit an application. We have an online portal at council, so you go on the Strathbogie website, you go under the planning tab, and there's a guide to show you where to lodge your application, and you upload all your documents, and then it gets received at the planning office. So once we receive those documents, it's allocated to a planner, and we start the assessment. And usually, if it's a complete application, so you've come to speak to us, we've told you exactly what to provide, it's normally like a straightforward application. We usually don't have to request further information, so it doesn't delay the process any further. So that's really good to have it all up front at the start. In some cases, we need to refer to like the CFA, an external agency, or even internal agencies such as LISA, the EHRA. And then finally, once everything is considered, a decision is made and all the requirements are met, a planning permit can be issued. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is how long is this going to take? So the time frame of an assessment. So that can differ from each property. Your application can vary. Sometimes your application can qualify for a Vic Smart application, which is a streamlined permit process. So that can be issued within 10 business days. It must meet the Vic Smart eligibility criteria though. So coming to see us and finding out whether you are eligible for that streamlined process is important. The other application process is we are given 60 days to complete. So sometimes we can do that a lot quicker, and sometimes it can be delayed due to referral agencies that we need to approach and have their assessment from. Key decisions for you as you start to think about your rebuild. For example, siting. Is there a better or safer location on your property to rebuild? That's an important one to have a look at. Planning control. So as Steph mentioned, there can be the EMO, the BMO, and setbacks. So they can influence what can be built, where it can be sited, and what supporting information is required. And of course, the big one is the budget. This plays a big part, not just for construction, but for the broader planning process. So we need to sort of include the costs of preparing new plans, obtaining specialist reports, lodging a planning permit application, which Rachel has just shared that the fee will be waived 50%, and professional advice along the way. So while there's a lot to think about, the rebuild process also provides an opportunity to deliver a better outcome overall, whether it's improving safety, environmental performance, or long-term livability. There's also some practical site considerations that come into play. One of the big ones is wastewater at your septic, and we have Lisa here to talk about that in more detail. Stormwater as well is an important part of the process. Vegetation, depending on what you're proposing, there may be some leftover vegetation to remove. Even dead or fire affected vegetation can still require approval. Landscaping, especially if you're in the erosion management overlay, that plays an important role as well. So it's really about making sure the rebuild isn't just a like-for-like replacement, but something that responds properly to the land and works well both now and into the future. So to finish up, chat with planning. We can do this by talking to a planner over the phone. You can come into council and we can have a chat face to face. That's a pre-app. We have a recovery hub that operates on a Wednesday from 12 to 3. And we have planning there, we have building, we have wastewater. So a few people that can give you further advice. So now I'd like to hand it over to Claire.
Sorry, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
What's the lifespan of your planning permit? Is it 2 years? Is it going to be extended past the 2 years? Because a lot of people, if they're especially going prefab, can't get into a prefab building program for 2 years to
Okay.
start with.
So there's been some changes
Mm-hmm.
to the Planning Environment Act. It's now been extended to, so development must commence within 3 years
Okay.
and completed within 5.
Okay. So if that still is the case though, because I know that people are looking at, longer than 3 years if that's what they really want, then
So-
will there be extra circumstances where you can get extensions?
There is.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
How long does the pre-existing use right? Like after the event?
Yeah, so it's 7 years to be back, to have rebuilt and be back in the property. Yeah.
Right. So you have to have started, say, 3 years before.
Correct, yeah. However, if you've got a valid planning permit, then you still got a
That's
valid
7
planning
years.
permit, yeah.
And so the fee waiver of 50% applies for 7 years, does it?
At this
Or is
sta-
that indefinite?
At this stage, the fee waiver is a commitment for 2 years,
2
where we
years.
can then though revisit it. So we are also wanting to encourage people to rebuild. So we didn't necessarily make a commitment beyond that, not knowing exactly what everyone will be doing, but we would revisit that. We will have a look at that around the level of uptake and where people are actually at once we get to that 2 year point. But as I said, we're continuing to really advocate for that 100% full waiver from the state government so that we can provide the relief that we know you guys need.
And there's no evidence required to say, well, my house completely burned down or it only partially burned down or the back of it burned down, so I'm going to put an extension out. Are there any requirements that the Shire needs to say, well, this is the reason why we're asking for the 50%, or is it just blanket?
So everyone that's eligible through the secondary impact assessment process. So some of you, I'm sure, well, hopefully all of you,
Yeah.
have had a secondary impact assessment process. So that supports us to provide you with that relief.
Okay.
And we work internally on that now. If we don't have the
Yeah.
information in the SIA assessment, then we work with the recovery team to provide that information to show planning.
And if you think of something between now, don't worry, there will be more opportunity to ask questions.
Well, thanks for the invitation to come and speak on behalf of CFA about the recovery process. So, for those that don't know, CFA's role in planning is really limited to the bushfire management overlay. So within Victoria, there are 3 levels of bushfire risk that have been mapped. There's areas that have been mapped low, such as major centres and built-up areas. Then there's areas which are mapped bushfire prone area, and they are dealt with by building code only. So if your property that's being destroyed was in the bushfire prone area, then the only requirement from a bushfire perspective is a bushfire attack level assessment, a BAL assessment. And that's done to the satisfaction of the building surveyor at the building permit stage from a purely bushfire perspective, notwithstanding any planning permit issues for farming zone and things like that. So just be a little bit careful. Make sure you don't go to some consultants or things, people like that, and say, I just need a BAL report. Because if they don't do the checking to see whether it's in both bushfire management overlay and the bushfire prone area, then you may be wasting your money with a report that's of no value at the planning stage. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So just be a little bit cautious. We do get quite a few BAL assessments. People pay good money for them only to get a further information because we're dealing in the planning system which requires a bushfire management statement. So if you're in the BMO, which is all that red blobby stuff over there, and you can definitely find out by going on to Land Vic or talking to the council and getting a planning property report, which will definitely tell you whether you're in the BMO or erosion management overlay, etc. If your building is in the BMO, then it's subject to the requirements of the BMO. So just because the BMO is across your land, if there's no buildings or works in the BMO, then you don't need to worry about a bushfire management statement or anything like that. You'll be in the bushfire prone area, so you'll need a BAL assessment. So it's really important that siting to work out exactly where you are. Now, in terms of what the BMO does, it's through the planning system and it requires a bushfire management statement to be prepared, which includes a bushfire hazard landscape assessment. So you look at the broader landscape to see whether the bushfire that could impact your site, where your house is, could it exceed what the design fire or the assumed fire of the standard is. So sometimes if people build on the tops of hills and you've got 20-degree slopes coming up to that hill, then the fire that's going to impact that particular spot may be worse than what the standard assumes. So the landscape assessment's there to work out, do we need some additional protection measures? You then have to do a bushfire hazard site assessment, and that's where you put your house, and then we assess the vegetation within 150 metres of that house. Doesn't matter who owns the land for that 150 metres, because as you know, bushfire doesn't really care who owns the land, it just keeps going. So it's 150 metres from where you site the house, and then you work out whether it's what type of vegetation it is. Now, at the moment, obviously, the vegetation is not there in the majority of cases, or you just got sticks with little bits of growth coming out of the trunks of the trees. The BMO and even the Australian standard says if it's fire affected or affected by some sort of event, then we go to what's known as what it was like beforehand, or steady state. So what's assumed to come back to. So if it was woodland before, it's probably assumed to come back to all woodland, forest, etc. So back in 2009, they didn't recognise any of that sort of stuff, and a lot of BAL assessments that were done following the 2009 bushfires was no vegetation here, BAL low. Well, clearly now, some 15 years later, that vegetation's back, and it's certainly not BAL low because it's back to forest and all that sort of thing. So that's been recognised to make sure that vegetation is what it is in what's known as steady state or mature state. One of the things with the BMO which is really important to consider is the siting. The siting requirements of the BMO say that it should be a site that best achieves as far from the hazard as possible, as close to the road as possible. There's sometimes those two are directly opposite each other, and provide emergency vehicle access. Just about everybody ticks off the emergency vehicle access, but sometimes if it's a 4 kilometre track to get into where the house site is, that could be problematic to comply with the BMO as it is today. However, we work with you and consultants or whatever it is through the process to get the best outcome from what the policy says and what you desire. But siting is really important. As was said before, there may be an opportunity to site a house better to achieve a whole lot of, more favourable outcomes, whether they're environmental or safety outcomes and things like that. So it's rare that through the bushfire rebuilds that I've been involved in, it's pretty rare that we have to stand on our dig and say, look, the policy just can't support a house in that location. But they're few and far between, and normally we come to some sort of negotiation which doesn't compromise safety, but achieves what you desire. So siting is important. The design of the building is really important as well. If you can design a bushfire resilient building, it stands a far better chance of survival, should another event come through, which eventually it probably will in whatever number of years, hopefully a long time away. But a bushfire attack level, and the numbers go from 12.5, 19, 29, 40 and flame zone, those numbers represent radiant heat. The higher the number, the hotter the fire is, and the more resilient the building has to be. As the number increases, the types of materials you can use get restricted. So at Bell 12.5 and 19, there's pretty much very limited restrictions on types of timbers you can use, for example. But as soon as you get to Bell 29, they need to be bushfire resisting timbers. As soon as you get to Bell 40, timbers are ruled out in flame zone as well. So there's a whole host of things that come in. But the bell is not a design. That's just purely specifying a construction standard, what materials we do. Through sensitive design from bushfire perspective, you can make a very, very resilient building, even at Bell 12.5, by how you design it with the walls, the windows, elevations, subfloors, and all those sorts of things. In this little handout here, the CSIRO have a fantastic website called their Best Practice Guide, which gives really good tips for really simple things that architects and planners can build into a house that make it a resilient design. So I really encourage you, just don't focus on Bell 29 or Bell 19 or whatever it is. If you've got the finances and the wherewithal to do it, and architects, etc., try and look at a bushfire sensitive design, because that will go a long way to a really resilient building. Once we've worked out where we're putting the building, we've worked out the vegetation and the slope, something called defendable space. And that's vegetation management. So that's in this little handout as well. If it's forest, the steeper the slope, the more vegetation you have to manage to a certain standard to achieve bushfire attack level. And that's all specified in the scheme. But I can certainly go into more detail if people are interested. So Bell 12.5, that has the greatest separation from the hazard. So for example, if it was forest on flat land, to achieve Bell 12.5, you need to manage 48 metres of vegetation to a certain standard. If you built to Bell 29, that distance reduces to 25 metres. So it's all sort of a space and distance type issue with the radiant heat. The further you get away, the less resilient the building has to be to the radiant heat. The bushfire attack level you'll get through the BMO has to be accepted by the building surveyor at a building permit. So there's some building regulations that say a BAL given at planning is what you get at building permit. That's why you don't get a BAL assessment if you're in the BMO, because you're just wasting your time. And the final two things you need, following all the defendable space and where you site the building and your bushfire attack level, is water and access. So there's a requirement under most of the zone requirements for use of the land for a dwelling, farming zone, wood conservation, etc., to provide emergency or firefighting water. The BMO requires, if you're on anything above 1,000 square metres, a 10,000 litre non-combustible tank with fire brigade fittings. And they're all specified what those fire brigade fittings look like. And the access, the fire brigade need to be able to get within 4 metres of the tank outlet. So if you're thinking about where you're positioning tanks and where your access is, just need to make sure that a truck can get within 4 metres of that water supply outlet. The non-combustible above ground tanks is what's required. Now it's not there purely for fire brigade use, it's there for firefighting use, of which if the fire brigade's there and there's water in the tank, we'll avail ourselves of it. And that's probably about it. Now if people are interested, now from a CFA referral perspective, under the scheme we've got 28 days to provide a response back to council. There's no way known that we take that long from a CFA perspective. So council, we've talked to councils to identify bushfire rebuilds when they refer them to CFA so they can be prioritised. We won't be holding them up. So if everything's there and it all stacks up, we've got pretty good desktop intelligence to ground truth a lot of this sort of stuff without having to come out and visit. Generally, if it's all there and complete, it's within 2-day turnaround from a CFA perspective back to council. So if there's further information, then we try and detail what that further information is. If you're looking at a consultant, I would recommend something called a bushfire practitioner and designer, BPAD consultant, level 2 or 3, not level 1. And that's administered through Fire Protection Australia. So if you put into the Google machine BPAD, B-P-A-D, and Fire Protection Australia, that will take you to their website, and then you can, there's a whole host of people that have been accredited to provide the service that you need. Now you can use others, and there's some equally good people that are not accredited, but the accreditation way sometimes the easier way to go. Any questions or? I'll leave some cards if people want to give me a call. Happy to. Now, we're not flushed with resources. I cover from Werribee to Mildura, across to Corryong, and back to Melbourne, essentially. And I've got a team of 2. So there's 3 of us. However, we're pretty efficient at what we do. We're always on the phone. And I'll leave some cards here which have got the mobile number on it. But feel free if you need to have a chat about something or you just want to discuss siting or something like that. Happy to. Yes.
You're talking about all this for housing as well.
Yes.
What about for sheds and that? How does that affect it?
From a BMO perspective, agriculture, well, probably should defer to council, but from a bushfire management overlay,
Yeah.
agricultural buildings are not a trigger under the BMO.
No. So we're replacing the sheds.
If it's an agricultural building, but I'll defer to council
Yep.
because we're just the lowly referral authority. We're not the responsible authority, so we get told what to do by council. But different buildings can be classified different ways. So it could be a rural store, for example, or it could be something associated with a, storage of hay or whatever it might be, or the equipment, machinery type stuff. Council set the rules, but if it's associated with agriculture, we shouldn't see it. Now, under the BMO, excuse me, under the BMO for non-habitable outbuildings, over 100 square metres, I've got some water, thank you. So for non-habitable outbuildings over 100 square metres, with the dwelling already on the land, all you have to do from a BMO perspective is provide 10 metres of defendable space. No water, no access, no construction requirements. Put it wherever you want. If it's within 10 metres of a dwelling, we would encourage you to try and move it more than that because otherwise there's fire separation requirements. It's really hard to do for a shed if it's an outbuilding. But if it's a farm shed, most likely there's no trigger under the BMO. But I stand to be corrected.
I'll defer to my planners, but
No trigger.
no trigger.
Yeah, because we don't want to see them
And
either.
just on that, if you don't need a planning permit and you just need your your building permit. If your shed's more than 6 metres away from your house or your dwelling, then there's no bushfire construction requirements for that shed, so you don't have to go and get a bell report for a shed if it's more than 6 metres. That's if you don't need a plan.
Yeah, that's within the BPA. Yeah. In the BMO, they increase that distance from 6 to 10 metres. So if you're 9 metres away from a house in the BMO, the fire separation requirements kick in. If you're just in the BPA and you're 9 metres away, they won't.
Yeah.
So that's why I encourage you, if you've got a big property, just move it that metre and a half to get rid of all that sort of stuff. Yeah, cool. Thank
Does
you.
your water tank have to be within a certain proximity of your house?
It should, according to the scheme, it should be within 60 metres of the outer edge of the house. Now, if you're asking me, because it's for your use first and foremost, it's ideal to put it within the defendable space area because they'd be able to access that water. But 60 metres is the limit. Now, if you want to put it somewhere else, we do have what's known as remote outlets. So if you want to put it somewhere, you can run pipe work from the tank to the driveway, so you can hide the tank away from them if you don't want it visible and things like that. So there's certainly information there about the size of the pipe work and all that sort of stuff and how that all works.
Thank you.
Terrific. No worries. I'll leave those, and if you want to take that, more than welcome to. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Now Lisa will come up, who's our environmental health officer.
Hi everyone. It's a lot of information to absorb, I'm sure, and I don't want to make it more difficult. So I'll talk mainly just about septic tank systems, and I think probably firstly you obviously need to consider where you're going to site your house, and you've heard from the others that that's probably your main priority when you're rebuilding. So once that decision's made, then you can think about your wastewater system. And I suppose if you're siting the house where your house was, the things you'd need to think about is that septic tank system that was there still suitable? And one of the things to think about with that is that you could get a plumber in to check it. One of the main challenges with an old septic tank system is that it may not treat all the waste in the house. So that is a requirement of the EPA at this point in time. So older dwellings often didn't do that. So if you're thinking about using an existing system, get a plumber in to have a look and get some advice from them initially. As we mentioned at the start, the land capability assessment requirement has now been waived for fire affected properties. And that was really to make it easier for you in terms of cost, because they can be expensive. And I've just heard all the other reports you're likely to need. So the advice that you can get is either from me at the council or initially your plumber about your wastewater system and what the requirements might be for rebuild. Most of you will be on land that's of size that you can fit a system, but you need to think about it in terms of it being a new system that probably will take up more space than perhaps what you've been used to in the past. So I'd encourage you to come and see me. At the moment it's only me, but I'm hoping for some help moving forward so that you can get some answers quicker. So the main process with a septic tank system is that you need a permit to install it. You also need a minor permit if you're actually connecting a new building to an older system so that we can check that it's okay. So there's just sort of two parts to that process, and it will just depend on what we have there and what's suitable for your site. Most of the time with land and space you can have a standard system, but there may be some occasions where that's not appropriate. It might be because of setbacks from waterways, or there might be some risk in terms of slope, the design of your property. So that's when we would come in and have a look with you and work through those steps. That's probably all I need to cover in terms of septic tanks, because every site is different, and I think probably just coming and getting some advice from your plumber is probably your first steps. And I get that you all need to think about all the other things in terms of planning and the CFA first. But I suppose if you need to ask some questions, please just come and see me. I'm obviously at the hub on Wednesdays, and then you can either email or ring me and ask some questions. The other parts, I suppose, to think about in terms of environmental health is your tank water safety. If you have some existing tanks and you haven't thought about cleaning up We're a fair way down the track, I'm sure you have. If you have any questions about that, please come and chat with me. And also, I noticed in the book we've obviously got some information about asbestos. I know that was a bit of a contentious issue for some people in terms of secondary impact assessments, and I hope that your cleanup of your sites has been trouble-free and that they've dealt with those issues for you. But if anyone has any questions, please come and chat to me after. I'm happy to talk to you about it. Anyone have any questions at this point? No?
Is there a rule of thumb distance from the creek to the septic?
There is, and it's often based on the actual water source. Yeah, and so as a general guide, if I said 100 metres, that would be a good guide. Any closer, we would have to assess it based on the site. Yeah. Help. All right, I'll hand over to Anthony.
G'day everyone, my name's Anthony Bell. I'm a building surveyor. I'm contracted to Attendees Shire. I'm there 3 days a week, so happy to chat with you guys then. Just a quick overview. I'm going to talk to you about building permits. Quick overview on, so the state building legislation, their acts and regulations pass through Victorian Parliament. So it's not rules that are made up by council, it's state legislation that covers the whole state. So the whole state's pretty consistent. Within that legislation, they've privatised the building permit system, so you can go and choose your own private building surveyor to issue your building permit. So council doesn't issue permits, you will just choose a building surveyor of your own choosing. So ask, if you know someone who's a rebuild, ask around, were they happy with their building surveyor? Or you probably don't want to be led too hard by your builder, because there needs to be some sort of separation between the builder and the building surveyor, because the building surveyor is the person who's making sure that the builder's doing a good job. And the building surveyor will do all the inspections, mandatory inspections. They'll be listed on your building permit, and they'll undertake the inspections, or they'll get a contract inspector to inspect on their behalf. And that's often the case. I use a contracting inspector where the building surveyor might come from a long way away. They still have to be registered in Victoria, but it's unlikely that the building surveyor themselves will be doing every inspection. Often they'll get a contract inspection to inspect on their behalf. So, also, the building surveyor will determine price and timelines. So I would encourage you to ring around, see who's charging what, and how busy are you? You know, how long is it going to take to get a building permit? You can also ask them what you need from me to be in a position to issue the building permit. So they'll let you know. You're going to need things like your site plan, plans of the buildings, whether it's a dwelling or a shed. You'll need a copy of your title information, and some reports like a BAL report, unless you've already gone through your planning permit process. If you've gone through a planning permit process and they've determined your bushfire attack level, the building surveyor doesn't have to then go and revisit that. You'll only need to go and get your BAL report. If you didn't need a planning permit, but you're still in that bushfire prone area, then you will just get that simpler report, a bushfire attack level assessment report, which is what we discussed before. It's an independent report which identifies the fire hazard, and then that will then determine the construction requirements of your dwelling. Sheds are exempt if they're more than 6 metres from your house. If you don't need that planning permit, 10 metres I think it is, you're saying under planning legislation. But you talked a lot about housing, you covered it really well, so I probably don't need to revisit that. So covered mandatory inspections. At the end of the process, once all your inspections have passed, your building surveyor will issue an occupancy permit, and that occupancy permit means then move back into the building. Often there might be some minor things to finish off, but the occupancy permit is just a certificate or a permit from the building surveyor saying that in their opinion, the building is okay to be occupied. So you might still have, paint the hallway or whatever it is, but you can get your occupancy permit before it's completely finished. But that's at the discretion of the building surveyor. So after all the inspections have been approved, and your final inspection, they may also ask for some documentation, such as your septic tank certificate to use. So they want to make sure that that's been signed off and commissioned, and they want some plumbing certificates and things like that. So before they issue the occupancy permit. Yeah, that's probably about it from me. But I'm happy to answer any questions of a general nature if you've got general building permit questions. Not everyone's favourite subject.
We're fortunate that we saved our house, but we need shedding. We
Yes.
still need building permits for hay sheds and every type.
Yeah, there's been no legislation change on that front. So any sheds
But do we
more than
need planning permits?
Maybe?
you'll always need building permits. You don't always need a planning permit. So for building work, building permits ensure that the structure complies with the building code of Australia.
Yep.
There are exemptions for sheds less than 10 square metres, so those useless little 3 by 3 things you get at Kmart. But yeah, anything bigger than 10 square metres.
Can you do retrospective building permits?
No.
No.
That's
So
the
I'm not
issue.
putting forward.
Too late. Well, I would advise you there to stop what you're doing, go get a building permit to make what you've got into a shed, and that they might send someone out to say, oh, I just want to have a look at your footings, make sure they're fit for purpose, and then I'll issue a permit to go exclude the footings to finish off what you've got there. So that would be my advice there. Thank you.
So can I ask
Yeah.
maybe the Shire, so the price of the building permit, it's included in the house that I'm building, but if you're independently building, so they apply for the building permit through the Shire still?
No,
Through the
private
through the
surveyor.
contractor?
Yes.
So just be aware that they might be selecting a building surveyor that they're more comfortable with.
Yeah.
It's always up to the owner to
Yeah.
appoint the building surveyor.
Yeah.
The Building Act says that the builder cannot appoint.
So you pay for your building permit to your surveyor, your building surveyor?
Yeah, it's a building
not to
surveyor.
the Shire?
No.
Right,
no,
okay.
no.
Yeah.
And then they lodge all the documents with
Yeah.
council. So council's a record keeper there.
Yeah.
So they'll lodge that they've been appointed.
Yeah.
They'll lodge that they've issued a building permit, and
Yeah.
here's all the documents.
Okay,
And then at the end, they'll lodge the occupancy permit.
sure, yeah.
So the council's aware of
Yeah.
those stages.
I think my question is more from council, I don't know if you have to say on that because you work in council. Well, we get that we have to build on the footing of what was there at the plan that was there before. But what if we build a bit bigger or a bit smaller? Is that okay or?
Under building legislation, absolutely fine. It's probably, if you want to ask if you can do something, that's probably more a planning query. The building permit is more looking at your building, making sure that it will comply with the building regulations. So under building legislation, you don't have to build exactly what you had before. You can go bigger, smaller, whatever, that doesn't matter. But I'm not sure if there's any ramifications under planning.
Possibly might need planning, yeah.
So the footprint of the house has to be exactly the same, or
No.
can they?
No, not under
Doesn't
building
have to.
legislation, no.
Like if we had like a 3-story house and now we want to do a 2 because we have to pay for it. Is that fine?
It's fine under building legislation. There's nothing at all stopping you from doing that. I don't know if that.
So you just need to look at what planning controls are there to be able to determine what you'll need to do afterwards. So absolutely come and talk to us to see what controls are there. You may or may not need a planning permit.
So there's no issue under building legislation, not at all. That's fine. But yeah, just check with planning about your specific situation. Would be my advice.
Other questions for anyone?
Temporary buildings. So I want to build something for short term until I build something for the long term.
Short-term
What's the
accommodation.
control?
Short-term accommodation buildings.
No, say shedding.
Oh, shedding. Yeah.
What's the control associated with that?
Yeah. If it's a shed, it needs a building permit. So
Even if it's temporary.
yeah, like what's temporary? 6 months.
Let's say a year.
Has it got concrete footings?
If you like.
Sorry.
Easier possibly.
Some concrete.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of people in the same boat. We're living
Absolutely.
in caravans.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We get minus 40 degree frosts here, so we need to put a roof over the top.
Yeah,
Now, as soon as we build something, we'll pull that roof down and we'll put somebody said to me the other day, we'll put the caravan on the front lawn and put a for sale sign.
Yeah.
So, but for the 12 months until we do that, we want to whack a roof on it. Well, I don't want to go and pay how much for a building permit?
I don't know, you tell me, you're the
I
one
have
ringing
no
around
idea.
getting prices.
I've not looked.
Yeah, so, yeah, I can only answer what the legislation says.
Right,
Yeah, as we said before, council can't change the state legislation, but
but it has no provision for a short-term.
There is
there is 6
provision
months,
for
if it's less than 6 months, so temporary buildings.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it would have to be removed after 6 months, so if it's a
Okay.
temporary storage building, there is an exemption for that. Yep, under the
Hopefully we
building
can all be over
regulations.
in 6 months.
Make it winter.
There are temporary accommodation provisions though.
Yes, there are, and there's, I think there
There's an
might be a
information
flyer.
sheet, I think, here around that. So that definition of temporary accommodation from memory ranges from sort of net 0 to
3
3
years
years?
maximum.
yeah.
Yeah, so,
So
but that's for a primary place of residence, while you're rebuilding a primary place of
Which is
residence.
what they
Yeah,
are.
which
There's
is what
a
they
lot
are.
of, yeah,
That's
so,
your question.
That's what a lot of the
But
safety people are in.
yeah. So there is provision in there that you don't need a building permit for that,
Right.
but they're very specific about what constitutes an emergency accommodation building. So I won't go into it all here now because it's a lot of stuff to go through, and I can't see a lot of people using it when you're looking at the fact that you're spending thousands of dollars in a building that you're just going to have to remove in 3 years' time.
Well, I think there's a few people who've been.
Well, yeah, there might be. So we've got some flyers printed off for those
They're
people.
all
I'm
out on
happy
the table just out there.
Oh, they're
really
there.
just,
Okay.
near the news
Yeah,
centres
cool.
and
So,
forth
yeah, we
and
can-
stuff.
we can have a chat about that, but yeah, but there's restrictions around size, and you have to get them connected to your septic tank, and there's a whole range of things. Yeah, it's not a simple thing.
How about which homes? Would that be depending on what the material is
No,
used?
No, kid homes need a building permit.
any other questions? No. So we're not gonna run away right away either. So if you've got specific questions, I really encourage you to come up and ask one of us. As well as, I think my key takeaway is your property is unique and your circumstances are unique. So please make sure you make an appointment or you come into the recovery hub or make time to see someone to get specific tailored advice to your property, to your overlays to help you through the process. Because I think that comparison to the next door neighbour or someone down the road, their circumstance might be very different because they might have completely different overlays within the planning scheme. So really encourage you to make that time because hopefully that then streamlines your process and makes this easier for you. We are here to help. We don't want to make this harder than it already is for each and every one of you. So we really do want to work with you on your own site-specific concerns. So we hope that we either see you all in at the recovery centre or the recovery hub, or that you make a time to come and meet with someone from council and hopefully meet with the whole team so you get the whole picture, not just parts of, and then feel like you're coming back all the time for that next piece. And this isn't the only session we'll do. We are doing another one at Crichton's Creek next week. So if there's people that couldn't make it tonight that you know of that might benefit from this, can you let them know? And we do also plan to come back up to Ruffy again, probably early July. And that really is recognising that each of you are probably at a very different stage. And some of this may have sunk in and some of it you might have thought, I'm not there yet. So we will keep coming back up to try and provide you with the information when you need it. So, yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to add, if you do want us to reach out, we have a sign-in sheet here. You can pop your details and we'll follow up and reach out. We also have AgVic here tonight, so if you haven't linked into any of their grants, they also have a farm planning workshop over a number
Yeah,
of
we've got a course, so it's a 6
Course.
weeks course, just roughly 1 day a week for a few hours a day.
Also a wealth of information. Advocate had some really good resources available. So if you haven't lived in, please go and pick up some resources and have a chat. If you have any feedback from tonight's session, please reach out to Kate or myself or have a chat to us tonight. We're always looking at ways that we can improve what we're doing as well. And as we said, this is the first of one of these sessions. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you find it? Oh, did you?